So you're reading a fantasy book, and the heroes draw swords against a band of baddies. Chaos ensues, blood sprays, and yet you're bored to tears. Or maybe it is exciting, but it doesn't really carry any narrative weight. There's no reason why this fight is happening. Like there wouldn't be a difference if the fight just never happened at all. It reads more like a random encounter in a D&D session. Maybe it just makes zero sense and breaks the laws of reality. And you're not reading like one of those crazy scaling power fantasies that mimics anime. You're reading like gritty, grimdark that's supposed to be realistic, but yet the hero gets stabbed in the gut, barely reacts to it, and then it just never comes up again. These, and many others, are common pitfalls that writers, both amateur and pro, run into a lot, myself included. So this begs the question, what makes a good fight scene? Well, there's no real simple answer to that question, and it's going to vary from writer to writer. Of course, I have a few thoughts on the subject, but frankly, I've realized through making this video that I had a lot to learn myself about writing effective and exciting fight scenes, which is why I asked 5 professional sword and sorcery authors to chime in on the subject.
So what makes a good fight scene?
There's 4 elements that I'm always looking for.
Character is tension and its release.
Breaking rules of grammar.
Conflict and momentum.
Fight scenes are very much like sex scenes in that regard. You know?
There isn't an inherent right or wrong way to write a good fight scene, but there is one unforgivable mistake. Writing a boring fight scene that nobody wants to read. Before I rediscovered sword and sorcery and pulp fantasy, I thought that fight scenes just weren't for me. I found myself skimming them or sometimes skipping them. I very rarely skip stuff in writing. I think that's silly. It's like, why are you reading if you don't want to read? But sometimes the fight scenes were just so drawn out in whatever I was reading, and I just didn't care because nothing mattered and it didn't change anything. That's not the case with good, exciting, effective fight scene writing. Hi everyone, I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of The Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. In this video, I'm going to talk about a few things that I think are important in writing fight scenes, specifically for realistic, medieval-inspired writing, but then I'm going to turn it over to 5 professional authors who know a lot more about this than I do. We have a lot of different perspectives here, and there's a lot of material just waiting for you to unpack it. This is the quintessential fight scene video for anybody interested in writing sword and sorcery or any sort of exciting heroic fantasy. Returning to the channel today are Matthew John, the author of To Walk on Worlds, Oliver Brackenbury, the editor-in-chief of New Edge Sword and Sorcery, Lee Patton, author of A Valley of Shadow and managing editor of The Arcanist, and a couple of newcomers, Luana Saitta, who has been published by Swords and Sorcery Magazine and New Edge, and Thomas Grayfson, who's been published by Crimson Quill Quarterly and is going to show up in the Whispers from the Iron Cauldron anthology later this year. All of these authors write really good stuff, so I'm excited for you to hear what they have to say. But before we get into it, I wanted to let you know that the Literary Fantasy Magazine 2026 is in full swing. Subscribers officially have their hands on the latest spring 2026 issue. It's a nice little pocket-sized book. I made a whole video about why we moved over to this form factor. And, you know, if you want to wait until the summer, don't worry. You will get the spring issue and the summer issue at any point that you subscribe. You get everything that's available. You paid for the year, you're getting the year. We're also running a backer kit campaign this summer, which will have options for current subscribers so they're not buying the same 2026 magazines twice. There's going to be some special stuff there for people who are interested in completing a collection. I should probably also tell you about my book, Ashen Rider. It's about a knight of a fallen goddess who saved the world, but damned his family in the process. My next book, Soil, is currently being serialized on the Literary Fantasy Magazine's website, and right now you can read it for free. You can read the first 2 parts and 2 related short stories, and it's coming out every month and concluding in June. You can also read Ashen Rider on there for free. I mean, I I just want you to read it. I don't care how you read it. Links for all my stuff and today's contributors are in the description. Now, let's get to the video. So if you're wanting to write historically grounded fantasy, pre-gunpowder especially, regardless of what area in the world you are targeting, you need to understand the historical martial art of that place. The broadest topic of study is HEMA, which stands for Historical European Martial Arts. You know, sword fighting, knights duking it out in armor, things like that. I've been a long time admirer of HEMA. I've always dreamed of getting involved in fencing clubs, but it just doesn't really fit into my life, and I'm not much of an athlete. Who knows? Maybe later on, maybe I'll become a sword fighter in retirement. Fantasy violence usually consists of armed conflicts between people in armor holding melee weapons, or things that you hit people with. How does that look? What does it feel like? How long does it last? And what does your character need to do to kill their enemy? These are important questions to consider. Understanding the physical fundamentals and limitations behind martial combat will give you a firm platform to base your good fight scenes on. Now, before I dive further, I want to let you know that this isn't everything. In fact, it can actually make your fight scenes drag if you're way too focused on the technical accuracies of a sword fight. You want drama and flair. There's a reason why Hollywood fighting looks the way it does. But if you lean too far from one to the other, you're either going to lose believability or lose excitement. You want to be in the middle with believable excitement. You do this by understanding that swords can't cut through plate mail and a bunch of other things. Understanding the names of things, what they do, what they're used for, how they are effective and how they are ineffective, make for a really interesting nuance that you can add into your interpersonal armed conflicts. This understanding helps you avoid immersion-breaking actions, like your barbarian just cleaving through solid plate with a longsword. Swords and other sharp, pointy weapons were made more for cutting flesh, killing people, and armor was made as a middle finger to it. Several demonstrations out there on the web by people much braver and crazier than I that shows that, you know, a rich knight's full suit of plate basically made you as invincible as possible on a medieval battlefield. Because of this, killing a knight before gunpowder had some unexpected avenues. Armored fights start with larger weapons like halberds or spears. Usually they climax in a grapple where the knights scramble for the daggers at their hips, orient the points between the plates, and press down until their enemy stops moving. It kind of becomes more like a wrestling match towards the end. A lot of people think that a blunt weapon like a one-handed mace could kill an armored knight by crushing their armor or by, ringing their head like a bell. Now, there is a little bit of truth to this. If you got hit in the head with a mace, and especially with a warhammer, and then once we get into the two-handed heavy area, these things are going to hurt you a lot more, you could die of a concussion a week later. Recently, the one-handed mace argument was proven demonstrably false by a risky demonstration by the modern armored fighter to quiet him.
It's around 20%, climb up to 40, later 60, and in the end, 80% of full force.
Yes, he's actually getting hit over the head, full force, by a mace, held by a guy on horseback. Maces don't kill knights, sorry people. Even without armor, people are tough and resilient. They're not just going to drop limp after getting a little flesh wound. They're going to fight for their lives, or they might even flee. While it's certainly possible to die and bleed out during a battle, it's more likely you're going to lay on the ground in agony. Or your adrenaline will get you through the conflict and you'll die a week later from complications such as concussion or an infection. At the same time, fights are extremely short, and real people don't have the endurance to fight for more than a minute or two. If you've ever fenced or done a sparring match, you'll know what I mean. Now, are these the most important things to think about in your fantasy fiction? No, absolutely not, especially if realism isn't something you're interested in. But I think a lot of us writing sword and sorcery or heroic fantasy or anything kind of in this grittier realm of fantasy, I think we're at least interested in trying to harness some level of realistic believability. Understanding these fundamentals, I think, will lead to more grounded depictions of armed conflict. Not only that, but the nuance involved with real armed combat becomes less and less important as your combatants stray farther and farther from weapons and humanoid bipedal forms. If you have wizards duking it out, well, the fundamentals of swordplay don't matter at all. If your barbarian is fighting a giant monster, well, there might be something to think about with the monster's natural armored plates if it has that sort of thing, or it might not matter at all because they're fighting a monster and there is no historical basis to a wizard duel or a monster fight that we know of. Fight scenes can also kind of lean more towards abstract, experiential types of writing. Something you'll hear from a few of the authors today is the importance of the emotional resonance of a fight scene. Sometimes violence is used to set tone or to characterize a character. Matthew John often throws drones, I call them, at his northern warrior Lackmanon in his Maxis stories. C.L. Moore's writing often describes Jyrell's battles more like a battle of will. She's often fighting magical enemies, and though she has a sword, there's nothing really all that martial happening in those fight scenes. In Black God's Kiss, for example, the prose just glosses over Jyrell's sweeping slashes as she walks through the tunnel to hell, disemboweling little demons, just almost like she's clearing cobwebs. It's part of the travel more than it's part of a dedicated fight. So fight scenes take different shapes and they adapt to the needs of the narrative depending on how brutal or, how much you want to damage your character. Anyway, that's enough of what I have to say on the topic. Let's get to our first guest.
When writing fight scenes, or writing in general for sword and sorcery, I don't really think there's one set of rules that applies to everyone. I'm usually a bit skeptical when people say writing has to be done a certain way. That kind of thinking feels too commercial, too rigid. For me, writing works best when it's open, limitless in its application and in its style. I don't really see the value in restricting imagination in search of some perfect formula. But when I'm writing a fight scene, there are a few elements that tend to matter most for me. The first element is tension. A fight should feel like it's building long before the first blow lands. The more pressure you stack into the story beforehand, whether it's personal, political, or psychological, the more the fight actually means when it arrives. At that point, violence isn't just action. It becomes a breaking point, something snapping under pressure, a moment where characters are forced into action. You can see this clearly in moments like the Red Wedding in A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, where it's not even a traditional fight scene, certainly not a very long one. But the tension, betrayal, and mounting dread make it devastating. And then the duel between Oberyn Martell and Gregor Clegane, where every moment is just loaded. It's not just violence, it's the stakes that have been building for decades before they duel. It's everyone standing behind them and what it means to them. It's consequences playing out in real time. The next element is release. For many of my characters, violence becomes a form of emotional and spiritual release. They don't have status or authority. They don't always even have the right words for what they're experiencing. What they do have is steel. And when violence finally happens, it's not clean or controlled. It's everything that's been building finally giving way. That pressure discharges through action. And that's where the emotional weight of the battle really lands for me, and hopefully the reader. In addition to tension and release, there's the mechanics of description itself on the page. What the violence actually feels like moment to moment. I always want the reader to feel something. It doesn't matter if that's exhilaration, discomfort, or horror, or a combination of the above. What matters is that it lands. Because if violence becomes overused or unexamined, it starts to flatten out. It loses all impact and it stops having any meaning. Again, I don't think there's one correct approach. Sometimes I'll go more technical, especially if a character would naturally think in those terms. That kind of detail can ground the scene and make it feel precise and real. A good example of this is in Sword and Sorcery, with Fritz Leiber's ill met in Lankmar. Krovos, the head of the Thieves Guild, is a fascinating character, and he doesn't approach battles directly or even courageously. He uses positioning, manipulation, the environment. Something as simple as a chair becomes part of the battle, something to hide behind, and that tells you everything about him. He's controlling the battle the same way he controls the Thieves Guild and everything and everyone else around him. Other times I'll lean more impressionistic, blurred motion, fragments of clarity, emotion cutting through chaos. That's less about choreography and more about the experience itself. The key question I ask myself is always the same. How does this specific character experience this moment? Because what they notice and what they don't notice tells the reader who they are. And when talking about Sword and Sorcery, it's always worth mentioning Elric of Melniboné, created by Michael Moorcock. In his case, Stormbringer isn't just a weapon. It defines his entire relationship with violence, power, and identity. So every fight isn't just about what happens physically, it's about what it costs him to take part in it. In my own work, I try to approach things differently depending on the story. In my story Cold Blood, issued in issue 5 of Crimson Quill Quarterly, violence isn't something that interrupts Vescara's life. It is her life. When she swings her bardiche, it isn't hesitation or fear guiding her. It's pure primal hunger. Warm blood coats her scales and her tongue flicks out, tasting iron on her face. There's even thrill in it for her. But what matters is that it isn't pure chaos. There's always tension between hunger and control. A part of her wants consumption, collapse, to surrender to her instinct. But she doesn't. Even when instinct pulls her towards dissolution, she holds the line. Eventually, when that restraint is removed, she becomes even more mercurial, and the battle shifts with her. In my story In the Silence of Her Need, which will be published in the Whispers from the Iron Cauldron anthology this September, Velena handles battle in a different way. The conflict between her and the demon Yorkshire is less about physical combat and more about opposing wills. There is still struggle, but the real force of the scene is both psychological and spiritual. Yorkshire reframes Velena's suffering as failure, corruption. Violence becomes internal. It's about doubt and the collapse of identity. And all that pressure eventually builds towards catharsis and transformation. So, ultimately for me, a fight scene isn't just action. It's character, it's tension, and its release.
Well met, reavers and readers. My name is Luana Saitta, indie sword and sorcery author, and I'm here to tell you today what I feel makes for a good fight scene. There's 4 elements that I'm always looking for. The first of them being stakes, not just the ones that kill vampires, although they can, of course, be present. I'm talking about stakes of the scene. The clear motivations of all combatants within the fight. Are we talking about our heroes versus soldiers of an enemy army? Are we talking about a long-standing rivalry in a one-on-one fight? Are we talking about friends coming to blows? All of these make for a completely different feeling in your fight scene. And I believe that sketching that out clearly before getting into the fight scene is half the work already done. Then we have powerful word choice. Don't be afraid to go a little over the top with it. Look at Robert E. Howard. He would write stuff like the Cormac Fitzgerald charged into his foeman with the blood-red eyes of a crazed bull, and he was a crimson dynamo of hate, and his sword was a vortex of violence, whatever. He would go all the way just to paint a picture. It's honestly, if you convey a feeling, like how does this fight feel, you don't even need to worry all that much about exactly describing all the cool moves that are happening, because the reader will understand, or even better, viscerally experience what this fight is supposed to be like, from experiencing it on the page. Third part is fun surprises. Where is your fight located? Which elements have you set up in the scene, ideally before the fight started? And maybe you're in a tavern, maybe you're on a construction site, maybe you're in a jungle. You'll want to have set up some fun things, like maybe that jungle has poisonous plants and that you can get pushed into. Maybe the construction site has like hammers and nails and saw blades lying around that your heroes and antagonists can mutilate each other with. But it's nice to know that that stuff is there. And so that the heroes or villains can go to town on each other with them. And finally, I believe that a good fight scene requires a change of status quo, so that you are at the end of the fight, at the end of the combat, you are in a different place as opposed to where you started. Not just physically, although maybe your heroes can get displaced, but especially emotionally. Where are we now that we've had these fisticuffs? Are we feeling victorious? Are we experiencing loss? Are we humbled, perhaps? Are we in a physically different place? Maybe have alliances switched? Who knows? The most important part is you're not where you were, either mentally or bodily, when you started this fight. So there you go. Those are my 4 elements for a successful fight scene. I hope you got something out of it, and I bid you farewell. Read the up and go there.
So what makes a good fight scene? Conflict and momentum. I like to think of fight scenes as a story within a story. They're like a mini tale. They have a beginning, middle, and end. Your fight ought to have an inciting incident, rising action, a climax, and your falling action. So why do I say conflict? Because just like your narrative, your fight will do better if itself has progressive complication. One of the ways that I tried to achieve this in a fight scene with a story that I wrote a few months ago, just as an example, is my protagonist is attacked by this bandit chief. Now they're both on horseback, they're both armored, and they have similar weaponry. So they're starting out on a relatively even playing field. But as the fight goes on, the armor of the bandit chief is too strong for the sword that the protagonist is using. He's wearing a coat of iron scales over chainmail. It's too thick, it's too sturdy. So that's the first problem that the protagonist runs into. And then the next is that because he can't really wound this bandit chief, he himself is getting wounded. He's bleeding from several cuts. Maybe more dangerously, he's simply becoming fatigued. He's getting too tired to fight. If he doesn't end the fight soon, he's going to be overwhelmed. So the fight proceeds, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and and then it gets better. As I don't want to give too much away, but this could present itself, even if you're having a battle between sorceress characters, maybe they're slinging their spells, and then your protagonist for some reason loses access to his or her magic, right? So then you have this sorcerer, sorceress who's relying on their magic to fight their magic opponent, and then they lose theirs. It's like, well, what do they do now? And introducing these conflicts they'll improve the pacing of the battle. But the other part of pacing that I mentioned earlier is momentum. This is how do you maintain momentum in the fight? Most fights should be short, and this is in general. Sometimes the story needs them to be longer. Maybe there's multiple phases to the battle, so to speak. But I think the vast majority of the time, you're going to be doing better if you can keep them as short as possible. It'll help maintain momentum by not repeating yourself. If you create a fight scene that's too long, you run the risk of repeating action. The actions of the fight may be exciting, so ultimately it's not getting anywhere. Now, if your story, or if the point in your narrative calls for a longer fight, a perspective shift can be a way to remedy this. If you need to step back and call attention to something that's going on during the fight, if there's a character available who's witnessing the battle, you can switch to their perspective so that the battle can continue. You're able to deliver any information that you need, but then deliver that information and then get back into the fight. Now, I wanted to bring that up in part because I think one of the things that will damage your fight scene and your story is if you start trying to include moments of interiority into the fight. I've been seeing this off and on where the character is in the middle of a life or death battle, and then we spend a paragraph or even two while he's musing on some kind of thought or rehashing some sort of memory when he's supposed to be defending his life or trying to kill his opponent. It's not that the information isn't important, it most often isn't. It's just not the right time. And I would caution authors, if there's any other way or any other point in the story where you can deliver that extra information outside of the battle, that you should make every effort to do that. For Sword and Sorcery, if you're breaking the pacing and you pull your reader out of the story, like I said, this is a death blow to the tale.
I also posed the question of what makes a good fight scene to our community on Discord, and here are a few of the responses that I got. Keep it short. I'm not a big fan of writing fight scenes, nor of reading them. I like the swiftness of them in, say, medieval romance. Yeah, this. There are some exceptions, like Dan Abbott can write incredible running battles that feel like you're watching a scene from a Bond movie. But in general, just writing words were said that could not be unsaid, and so bare steel was drawn in anger, then came a time of hewing and thrusting and red bodies upon the floor, does plenty good work. I think this has a lot of value when you have a fight coming up that doesn't necessarily have important narrative weight, but you want to highlight your character's violent tendencies. Well, actually, I realized I kind of like the detailed approach to fight scenes, but specifically when it's focused on the injuries and how they feel for the character. Less of a blow-by-blow, but more so the tactical response from hitting and wounding another human, while also being injured yourself. The emotions that come with it, etc. As long as there are stakes and you feel them, you are good. I love when a fight scene is in character, so to speak. Just like real people, characters should each have their own style. Their movements should have personality. It's just two people bashing each other with swords, and it tells you nothing about the people wielding them. That's boring. Is the character scrappy? Are they quick thinking? Are they fine with underhanded tactics? Do they stick to a rigid structure? Is their weapon an extension of themselves, or do they seem unpracticed with it? Are they more defensive or offensive? There's so many things about the way a character moves and fights that can tell you about them. This is a great point, and I think Thomas already brought up the Elric of Melniboné topic, but I have a couple other examples too on this. Logan Ninefingers in Joe Abercrombie's The First Law series, he has like a berserk state where he has no morality and just murders people. The way that he fights in his normal state of mind is very reserved and veteran in nature. He's been in a lot of fights, he's survived a lot, and he's extremely tough, and that is shown through the way that he is depicted in those fights. When he is in berserk mode, and he can't really see friend from foe. He's completely honorless, and he becomes essentially a monster. This draws such an intense contrast on that character to where the Bloody Nine and Nine Fingers are essentially two different characters. Another example from popular media would be Bronn of the Blackwater from Game of Thrones. It's been a long time since I read the books, so I don't remember how this scene was depicted in the books. I refuse to reread those things until Bastard George releases the next book. I'm so sick of incomplete epics. Oh my god. But my fiance and I just rewatched the show, and I really have always loved the scene where Bronn is fighting that knight in the Eyrie. He seems to be at a disadvantage. He's wearing light armor. He's not entirely covered. He doesn't have a helm, and his opponent has full plate armor, a helmet, and a shield. Essentially, in a more historically accurate fight, there's just no chance that a guy armed like Bronn would have won that fight, aside from luck. Like I said, a fully armored knight is almost invincible, especially against blades, which armor is designed to thwart. But Bronn doesn't fight with any honor. He uses his environment. He will trip the guy. He stabs him in the back, and he kicks him off a ledge. You know, he does all these bad sorts of underhanded tactics, and it really sets up Bronn's character for the rest of the series. He's a mercenary. He cares only about himself and his own personal gain. He has no regard for honor. Where the knight he was fighting fought in a way that is approved by the society, Bronn fought in a way that has kept him alive. I really think the duel in the Traitor Baru Commormrant is a good example for people who espouse shorter fight scenes being better. It's both technical and expressive and captures the atmosphere really well. It's a public duel with a lot on the line, so it details not only the combatants, but also the crowd and the nervous protagonist whose fate is being decided. It uses real-world sword manual terminology as well for the sticklers. That's cool. I'm going to have to read that. He put up some examples, so I will go ahead and share those screenshots if you want to read it. This also makes me think more about Abercrombie. One of my favorite things about Joe Abercrombie's books are the duels. There's several instances where characters are put into the circle, which is like his Northmen gathering around in a circle, and they hold shields, and there's two guys dueling in there. Those are always the most exciting. I'll have to read those books again to figure out why those scenes stick with me so much. But those scenes freaking rock. I love the circle scenes. And there's even a couple of duels in like a tournament setting in the first few books. Abercrombie really knows how to write a duel. I feel like usually one-on-one can get kind of repetitive with lesser writers, but it could also be some of the most exciting stuff you've ever seen.
Breaking rules of grammar. Should I just say that one? Not overtly breaking the rules, but just fight scenes are when I shut off my stringent adherence to like basic form and complete sentences, independent clauses. When I write a fight scene, one paragraph might be 3 words, and then I'll knock over to the next one. I try and have just the way the words are laid out to have their own rhythm. It's quick, it's punchy, kind of hard to explain other than I read them out loud. I try to have the nerves do the heavy lifting. Don't be afraid to, he didn't punch someone, would be, it was a bad example. I guess verbs. Verbs are good. Trim your adjectives, keep it moving. It's a fight scene. Get your point of view on lock, because I've never written a fight scene that isn't from a not third person, but from a single point of view. Now you could do the Abercrombie thing where you pause and you jump into someone else's head, right? You almost see that tracking shot where the camera is deciding, hey, let's meet this guy for 10 seconds till his head gets blown off. And then you can do all that. I think I'm rambling, but I think that You gotta, you're just showing it through eyes, somebody's eyes. You see, you have this top-down view of the battle, like even a siege. You have to write on a person well. You have to get behind the eyes of somebody. It's not a time to be omniscient. That
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things that Steven Erikson will do before a big battle. Is he just starts going through all the little foot soldiers that you've never heard from before, and
so he can name them later and kill them.
yeah, every single one of them dies. I think that's a big thing in the Odyssey too.
All right, my opinion of that is, well, you don't want to do what I call, and others I think have as well, the IKEA assembly manual, where you meticulously describe exactly where everyone's hands and feet and swords and shields are and where they move from here to here and how to do that. I understand why we do that, right? I understand that sometimes we're thinking very visually and we want to describe kind of almost like a blow-by-blow of like a movie fight scene. But even when you watch a movie fight scene, you'll notice like editing and stuff, like you don't actually see every single movement, right? And also it is a prose medium, so people will fill in those kinds of gaps with their imagination. They don't need you to tell them exactly how one hand moved here or one sword moved there. They can kind of, they'll figure it out, What they need is for you to tell them like a bit of interiority of the character. It doesn't have to be a monologue, just a sense of their emotional state and how that is affected by the twists and turns of the fight scene. And those twists and turns where like the fight really like goes somewhere else, and they move up the stairs to somewhere else, or like, oh no, now he's in danger whereas a moment ago he was on top, those are the parts where you get into the specifics of describing what happens, right? Like describe like the twists and turns and the big moves. Don't get lost in every little inch of it. Give me the emotion. Give me, the stuff that affects the story at large. Give me the things that make me feel. And my imagination will happily fill in the little gaps of where the feet and swords and so forth are. I make this a joke because it makes it more memorable, but it is also a deeply true one. Fight scenes are very much like sex scenes in that regard. You want to identify with characters. You want to, feel what they're feeling. You want to be in there with the moment with them. You don't want to be lost in someone going, and then he placed his hand on the bosom any more than you want to have, and then the sword touched the shield in that way, but then the sword went there. It gets bogged down and awkward. So, like a fight scene, if you're watching it, you want to see things moving and understand everybody's intentions and what they're feeling, what's going on the screen. You want that on the page. That's my feeling for the fight.
Well, there you have it, folks. Thanks for taking some time to learn about writing better fight scenes with me. If you want to be involved on another topic video like this and have your answer highlighted, go ahead and get on Discord. I will post the community question, ideally on the week that the video goes up, but this time it was a few weeks ago and I had to hunt down those answers. We also, if you are a writer, go ahead and contact me. Let me know if you want to be featured on one of these videos. I am happy to check out your work and promote what you do. I will say space is limited, so whether you are included or not isn't a guarantee, but I am really interested in hearing from writers in the community who are out there publishing cool stuff. Whether it's self-published or published by publishers, I don't care. I'm just tired of saying the word publish. Anyway, that's all I have for today, folks. You have a wonderful day. Keep writing, keep revising, and keep making exciting fight scenes. And maybe read a bit about how swords are swung.